Hello and welcome to everybody. We're going to start our webinar. My name is Dr. Helen Lavretsky. I'm the director of the Integrative Psychiatry Clinic and Program here at UCLA, and we are grateful today to have Drs. Gerbarg and Brown, all the way from New York, who are longtime colleagues and real pioneers of integrative medicine applied to psychiatry and mental health, here with us to educate us about breath, body, mind practices for relief of stress and trauma in healthcare personnel, patients, and families. And of course, they're set in New York. Dr. Brown is the associate professor at Columbia University, and Dr. Patricia Gerbarg is an assistant professor in psychiatry at New York Medical College. They are real pioneers of integrative psychiatry and are known as authors of the books that promote breath-based practices, but also knowledge in herbal therapies for stress and other psychiatric disorders. And they will share their wisdom with us today. They're also known as pioneers of humanitarian work around the world. They work with Red Cross and other like organizations to work with trauma around the world. And they will share their data and some videos and knowledge from all of this that is highly applicable to the COVID-19 pandemic and all recent events. Welcome, Drs. Gerbarg and Brown.
Thank you very much, Helen.
Thank you. Good to be with you all.
Okay, so let's get started. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Helen. Right. So we're going to be talking about our Breath, Body, Mind program, which we've spent the last 20 years or so developing, using it both for individual patients in therapy, as well as for groups, as well as for very large populations who've been affected by mass disasters. And now, of course, we're in a global disaster due to the COVID crisis, and we hope that some of these practices will help people who are being affected by that. We are the co-authors of some of the citations in this presentation. And I do want to mention, if any of you are easily triggered, there are some images of traumatic events, for example, a picture of the World Trade Center. If you need to leave the room, please take good care of yourself during that part of the presentation. So what is Breath, Body, Mind? Well, it's a program of evidence-based practices that are centered around the breath, but include movement and meditation and other things. And they are informed by polyvagal theory, which we'll talk about later. We designed these specifically to rapidly reduce symptoms of stress and trauma. And we also have adapted them so that they can be used for adults or children or families, and they're easily integrated with any other form of treatment. So I'm going to talk about some of the many mechanisms of action that underlie the effects of these practices, very briefly touch on a couple of our studies, and give some examples of the disasters we've worked with, and then talk about the current COVID crisis. And then Dr. Brown is going to actually show and lead you through some of the practices, so you'll get to experience what they feel like for yourself. So the fundamental concept here is that breath and emotion are bidirectional. And by that we mean that for every strong emotion, there is some corresponding breath pattern. So for example, when we're anxious, our breathing is rapid and shallow. And specific association. It turns out that this works in reverse, that by changing your pattern of breathing, you can have a very large effect on the emotions that you're experiencing if you know what patterns of breathing to use. And we call these voluntarily regulated breathing practices because the effects are quite different from what happens when we're just breathing automatically without thinking about it. Now, the autonomic system regulates all of the automatic functions of the body, our heart rate, our respiratory rate, all the organs and glands, but it has many other effects as well. You know that the sympathetic part of the system comes into play when when there's danger and we need to either fight or run away. And the parasympathetic system is the part that calms us down and helps us recover from stress or exertion. The most common imbalance of the autonomic system that we see these days is one in which the sympathetic branch is overactive and the parasympathetic branch is actually underactive. So most of the medicines we use will dampen down the overactivity of the sympathetic system, but they will not increase the activity of the parasympathetic. So we don't get a true balance. We found that the simplest and fastest way to help the situation is by doing coherent breathing, because that both reduces the overactivity of the sympathetic system and at the same time, it boosts and strengthens the parasympathetic system. So we get to a place of true balance and every system in the body works better. So how do we activate the parasympathetic system? Well, we have to know that the main pathways of the parasympathetic system go through two large nerves called the vagus nerves. About 20% of the fibers in those nerves are regulating our organs, but about 80% of the fibers are bringing messages from the body up to the brain, from inside the body. These are called interoceptive messages, and they tell the brain what is happening in every area of the body from moment to moment. So all that information goes to the brain. If we breathe slowly, we can activate the vagal pathways. So the vagus nerve is not just involved in regulating our organs, it's actually also involved in emotion regulation, stress reactivity. It is the anti-inflammatory system of the body, and very more recently has been found it's involved in how we relate to others, our social engagement system, and I highly recommend you read works by Stephen Porges on this topic. And so it's very much involved in how we bond to people, our capacity for empathy and love. And also it affects our perceptions and observations. So just to give you an idea of the pathway, say this is one of the vagus nerves and it's bidirectional. We're going to select the lungs. We're focusing on the lungs today. So messages from the lungs, every time you breathe in and out, millions of little bits of information, because your lungs have sensors all over them, go up to the brain, and all that information then ascends in multiple pathways to all the major regulatory areas in the brain. So one pathway goes to the limbic system where emotions are processed and regulated in the amygdala. Another pathway goes to the thalamus in the center of the brain. The thalamus communicates back and forth with vast areas of the cerebral cortex. Another pathway goes to the hypothalamus, which regulates cortisol stress response. And other pathways go all the way up to the higher processing centers like the prefrontal cortex. And they're involved in higher levels of thinking. So we use coherent breathing to activate the vagal parasympathetic system. And we define coherent breathing as very gentle breathing between 3 and 6 breaths per minute with equal length of inhale and exhale. Very gently breathing out, usually through the nose, in and out through the nose, that can be through the mouth, and exerting no force or pressure. And when we do this, it induces a calm but alert mental state. It's a particular mental state. So for the average adult, it's between 4.5 and 6 breaths per minute. So when we do groups, we use 5 breaths per minute, which seems to work really well. For small children, we have a slightly higher breathing rate. Here are some of the effects of coherent breathing. It's also been called resonant breathing. It reduces anxiety. It reduces insomnia, it helps sleep, reduces anger, impulsivity, cravings. It improves mood and energy. It improves mental focus and mental clarity. It improves our ability to relate to other people. It improves oxygenation, lowers blood pressure, and it reduces pain. So begin to imagine all the different ways that you could use coherent breathing in your life. We've used it for so many different kinds of treatment in all different kinds of situations. Now we learn to regulate our physiology first by co-regulating with our caregivers early in life. And to do that, we need to have conditions be safety, closeness, and contact, bonding. Then we can co-regulate with our caregivers. In mammals, the regulators of physiology are embedded in our relationships. And if all goes well there, we're able to develop good self-regulation and good social engagement. So you can see in the panda bears, it starts with eye contact. And in the koala bears, this is a beautiful example of co-regulation. They're close, the mother and the baby, very close, they're very still. And all of the physical transmission of the physiology there, the mother's co-regulating the baby, and the baby's co-regulating the mother. And this is going to develop a very good, strong, resilient system in humans as well as other animals. But what happens when there's excess trauma or neglect? That can disrupt this process of autonomic self-regulation development. And what can happen is we get defensive reactions, will displace social engagement, and we'll start to see fight, flight, and other reactions. This disruption also contributes to the progression of many stress-related medical conditions. So according to Steve Porges and polyvagal theory, we can perceive our environment in three basic ways. Either we feel safe, or we feel there's danger or life threat. So we call this the green zone, when we're feeling safe. And when we're feeling safe, our parasympathetic system, and particularly the myelinated fibers, those are the more recent evolutionary development, and they transmit impulses very quickly. These myelinated fibers are kind of running the show. And when they are, we're not defensive. We're able to relate well. We can be still and not be afraid, which is important. That's how we're close to people. And we're flexible and adaptive. We're well regulated in our emotions. We can bond, love, be intimate, soothe, heal. We can cooperate and be empathic. But if we feel there's a danger, then the sympathetic nervous system may kick in. And when that happens, we become defensive. We're ready to fight or run away. And we're not ready to relate well. Our emotions are dysregulated. We might have anger, fear, anxiety, be hypervigilant, and overly reactive. Now, we have to be this way in certain dangerous situations in order to survive. But when the danger's passed, we want to be able to flip back into the green zone. And what happens these days is we are bombarded with so many stressful messages, even just watching TV. There's one thing after another thing after another. So this system gets ramped up. And even when there's no immediate danger, it doesn't calm down. So we're stuck here. And that has negative effects. It ages us, it exhausts us, it depletes our energy, and it generates all of these negative emotions. So we're using the breathing to help people move themselves back out of the danger zone into the green zone so they can be comfortable, happy, and healthy in themselves and in their relationships. Now, if we're really in serious trouble and we can't escape, then sometimes if we feel our life is in danger, we'll default into the life threat zone. And in that zone, the unmyelinated, the older, more primitive fibers take over. We're very defensive, and we may become immobilized with fear, a freeze reaction. We might get disconnected, dissociate, or be numb. So again, what we're trying to do with the breathing is stay in this zone or be able to get back to this zone, because that's what stress resilience is all about. Interoception, I mentioned, is the perception of feelings from inside the body. And this just shows the area in the cortex where a map is formed of the internal state of the body. And this communicates with all the higher level areas, the salience network. So voluntary control of breathing actually provides a portal to the interoceptive communication pathways of our body and brain. And when we're able to make changes in our pattern of breathing, we can change the interoceptive messages going from the body to the brain. And that can rapidly change what's going on in the mind and emotions because the brain listens to the lungs. That's my big special effect. I hope you liked it. So breathing, it turns out, recent studies, more and more studies are showing that breathing actually entrains the brain's electrical activity. And what do we mean by that? It means that the breathing pattern can kind of lock in or set the pattern of electrical activity. And that's been found to be particularly true in the insula, which is the area I was mentioning, as well as the amygdala and other important areas of the brain. Some of the differences between just automatic breathing without thinking about it and voluntarily paced breathing is, first of all, there is more locking of the electrical activity that occurs, locking with the respiratory pattern, especially in certain areas of the brain, the frontotemporal and insular network. So paced breathing has more of a locking effect. And also when we focus our attention on breathing, that also increases the entrainment in critical areas. Slow-paced breathing helps organize alpha rhythms across broad areas of the cortex. So for example, here we see an electroencephalogram, and the electrical patterns across the brain look kind of chaotic. This is a woman, an older woman, who'd been doing breathing practice only about a week. She's a beginner. But what's happening down here is you begin to see the brain waves lining up into a regular pattern already. Here's an advanced practitioner, and look what's happening here. We have giant nesting brain waves all in synchrony across all. This is called whole brain synchrony. And this is important. This helps the brain communicate better with itself, solve problems better across vast areas of the brain. Now, GABA is the main inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. And it's very important because if we think about the symptoms of anxiety and the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, these are overreactions that are generated in the amygdala. And the overactivity in the amygdala is characteristic of traumatized people and anxious people. We need to inhibit the overactivity in the amygdala, and that's why we need an inhibitory neurotransmitter, which is gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA. So we postulated that the slow breathing might increase brain GABA levels as an additional mechanism by which we could calm down the overactivity in the emotion centers. And for the last several years, we've been fortunate to be testing this theory with Dr. Chris Streeter at BU in controlled trials of patients with depression. The people are given a program of yoga and coherent breathing. And this study ran, the initial study ran for 12 weeks. What you see here, the red line shows you the cumulative number, sorry, let me get back there. The cumulative number of minutes of yoga and coherent breathing that they did over a period of 12 weeks. And the blue line shows you how their scores on depression measure went down. Okay, so more yoga and coherent breathing, better and better in terms of depression. But the other thing we found, you can see in this brain scan, a red rectangle where the thalamus is. Remember I had mentioned the thalamus as that communication center in the brain. And what you see here at the beginning of the study, this was the GABA level. And as it progressed, we saw an increase in the GABA level in the thalamus. So this was the first bit of evidence confirming part of our theory. An additional mechanism, I told you there'd be a lot of mechanisms, we believe is that slow breathing increases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. And that might also be why people who do this over time find that they have more feelings of love, feeling connected to other people. It's been found that if you stimulate the vagus nerve, you do increase the release of oxytocin. And even a clinical study has shown that serum oxytocin levels go up when people do these kind of practices. These are some of our studies that have been published, just to give you a sense of the different types of situations where we've used these practices. And all of these conditions have shown very significant improvements in response to the practices we use. I'm going to talk a little bit about the World Trade Center attacks because for many years we've been giving pro bono programs. We were invited by a nonprofit to help many hundreds of thousands of people really affected, many of whom were not helped by their conventional treatments. So this little nonprofit was offering alternative ways to help them recover. And we began giving programs with great success. And I think we've helped thousands of people, both in terms of their emotional symptoms, but also their respiratory symptoms. Many of those cleared up when they hadn't responded to other treatments. And so that also is a link to the COVID situation where we're going to have a lot of people who have residual respiratory problems, those who had COVID. And these breathing practices are very good for respiratory function. We did a couple of simple program evaluations of this in the 9/11 responders. These were first responders and people who escaped from the towers. The first one had 17 subjects, and we found very significant improvements in anxiety and in depression. They were given our basic 2-day workshop. We do 5 or 6 hours a day for 2 days. That's the whole intervention. And yet these people, many of whom had been suffering for years, had very significant improvements. And we did another group of 27 people, and they also, anxiety and depression scores improved quite significantly. We've done a good deal of work with veterans. This was our first study that Dr. Brown did with Australian Vietnam veterans who were 100% disabled for 30 years from treatment-resistant PTSD. They were all had medical issues and were on multiple meds. He did a 6-day intensive breathing program with them. And what you see here are their PTSD scores, which averaged around 58 at the beginning of the study. And after 6 weeks, there was a 14-point drop. And by the end of 6 months, there was a 28-point drop. Very significant improvements. This is the control group. When they got the intervention, they ended up in the same place. And many of these men were no longer would qualify for PTSD. So one of them said, if we had gotten this when we came back from Vietnam, we wouldn't have lost 30 years of our lives. We've also done quite a few programs on military bases with active duty military personnel. We're not authorized to give the names of the bases, but just wanted to give you a sample because we have found the same results, whether it's working with the Army, the Navy, or the Marines. This was a very short 4-hour program. We did an entire military brigade, and 50 to 100% improvement was reported. So we're showing you the percentage of the soldiers who reported 50 to 100% improvement in 8 symptoms after a 4-hour program. They noticed improvements, significant improvements in feeling calmer, less tension, less anger, better mood, less worry, clearer mind, more alert, more energy, less pain. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about some of the disaster relief programs. What you see here is a group of women and children. During the wars between North and South Sudan over the last 50 years, tens of thousands of captives have been taken from South Sudan into North Sudan and held in abject slavery, some of them for decades, and they're being brought out now. This was a group of about 400 of them. They have just walked for a week through the desert with very little food or water, carrying their babies, and you can see the pain and suffering on their faces. They've just crossed the border and sat down under a big tree. And here, this is in 2011, you see Dr. Brown. There's about 400 of them. He's given 20 minutes to teach them some breathing practices. I can't show you the video of that because we don't have time, but basically by the end of 20 minutes, they looked like they were completely different. They were laughing and smiling and jumping around and hugging each other. It kind of broke the spell of slavery and began a healing process. So about a group of the women, 19 women, volunteered for a little evaluation that we did there. Basically, they taught the staff how to give them 20 minutes of breath, body, mind a day, 5 days a week for 18 weeks. The women came. And this shows what happened. Their PTSD scores improved by over 70% at the end of 18 weeks. And their mood scales also over 65% improved. This was the 19 women. And they then came to Dr. Brown and told him they wanted to be the breath, body, mind teachers in South Sudan. So one of our criteria for our programs is we want them to be sustainable so we can quickly train local individuals to continue the practices, because when the NGOs leave, the trauma goes on. We know that for generations. And here are two of the women. When they finish their breathing, they jump up and dance now. There was a South Sudanese pharmacist. Dr. Brown gave a 6-hour training to the psychiatric staff at Juba Medical Center in South Sudan. And the pharmacist there took the training and did the breathing practices for 20 minutes a day for 7 days. His story was that his village had been attacked about 9 years earlier, and he witnessed his sister burning to death in the flames. And from that day, every single day and all night, the image of his sister burning in the flames is before his eyes. It never goes away. He does the breathing for 20 minutes a day for 7 days and comes back to tell Dr. Brown, I feel free. The images were completely gone. So we've had quite a few people report a sudden and a permanent resolution of long-standing trauma symptoms. Coherent breathing reduces defensive reactions and activates feelings of safety, being connected, loving, and being loved. And we feel that this is going to help counteract the emotional isolation and disconnection that people are feeling during the corona crisis. This is a mass disaster. It's very challenging. Healthcare providers are in a situation where they're caring for patients during a disaster while they and their families themselves are being affected by the disaster under conditions of great stress without adequate protection. So they're really experiencing the same symptoms as their patients pretty much, and yet they have to function regardless of how they're feeling. The most common things that people complain of are fear, anxiety, worry, trouble sleeping, isolation, loneliness, and of course, loss. Many people have lost their loved ones. They also complain of weight gain from overeating and inactivity, and they complain about irritability and anger. From what I've been telling you, you can see that these practices are going to help by calming down and helping people overcome their anxiety. It's also very good for sleep at night. It's going to help them feel more connected. And if you reduce people's anxiety, which is driving their eating, they're going to have a little better chance to overcome this problem. Also, this breathing reduces addictions. I haven't mentioned it's very helpful for people who have substance abuse, who are going through withdrawal, and so on. So it can also be helpful for cravings, including food cravings. So it would be helpful in that situation. And of course, irritability and anger is leading to more abuse and trauma within the homes themselves. So the extent to which we can help people rapidly stop feeling angry and calm down and control themselves, you're going to have less abuse and trauma going on in the homes. And of course, depression as well. So by improving autonomic balance, we're going to be putting people more in the green zone where they'll feel calmer and safer. They'll be more connected, feel closer, trust, and bond. And we want to also provide this for families. This can be done through online media. Healthcare workers benefit from learning these practices. It helps them not only with the stress and anxiety, but also their exhaustion and mental focus. I'm going to show you a video of a young doctor. Well, actually, let me first tell you, we did do a program for healthcare providers who were under stress following the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Their systems were very depleted for healthcare, and we gave them a 3-day train the trainer program so that they could begin to provide this for the people they served. And what we found was that initially, there's about 183 healthcare providers, had very high levels of perceived stress. We gave them this 3-day program and that was it. They were left to practice on their own. In 6 weeks, their perceived stress levels were actually better than normal. They also had very significant improvements in feelings of engagement, revitalization, tranquility, and reduced physical exhaustion. So we can provide these programs now through online. We can teach people, healthcare providers, and so forth, making the transition to teaching these practices. We've spent months figuring out how to do that. And this is Dr. Bilal Ahmed. He took our breath, body, mind teacher training so that he could use this for patients in Pakistan. And after he finished the training, which he did virtually online with us, he sent me this video.
Hi, my name is Dr. Bilal and I'm an acute care doctor here in Karachi, Pakistan. So in the current corona pandemic, we're facing a lot of uncertainty and stress. We're short on PPEs, we have patients crashing, and it just gets really overwhelming at times dealing with these things and trying to manage patients in the correct way. So one thing that's really helping me stay focused is the coherent breathing that I do sometimes during, like with my mask on, and other times in my breaks. And it really helps me to stay centered and grounded and to be able to do my job right. And I feel that as healthcare providers, we are really burning out at this time. And I think this is something that we should be learning the skill to breathe at 5 breaths per minute. And it will really help us get through the stress we're facing and perform better so that we can serve the community better.
So we think these slow breathing practices have great potential for public health applications because they're easy to learn, they're generally safe, regardless of people's physical condition, and they reduce symptoms of anxiety and stress. They're very good for healthcare providers in emergency situations, and they improve how we function, how we think, make decisions, and perform. We have programs for children. This is a little girl in an after-school program. She has a little stuffed animal on her belly. We call it a breathing buddy, and we use it to teach children coherent breathing. Here you see very shortly after the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, one of our teachers working with a group of children. They've been quite traumatized. They've been outdoors, difficulty sleeping, and she's teaching them some of our practices. You can see even young children enjoy this. And afterwards, they're so calm that they're falling asleep. These are children in an inner city school in New York, very low functioning school, high stress families and environments. They're doing a practice we call ha breathing that rapidly quiets them, focuses their attention, and also helps with their emotion regulation so they don't have to run away from school when they get upset. You can see how much fun they're having with it. This is a picture of me in a shelter for Middle East refugees in Berlin. I'm teaching the women coherent breathing with the intention, then I teach them how to teach their children so that they can help them sleep at night in these large noisy shelters. And I'm teaching our translator, Jasmine, coherent breathing for this little girl. The little boy has already kind of half fallen asleep. So Mary Dem has been the psychologist for the Boko Haram girls who were captured in 2014. And several years later, they were liberated. And they're now in a university and suffering severe post-traumatic stress. She's been working with them, helping them since 2014. And 2 years ago, she contacted us and came to train, got her breath, body, mind level 1 teacher training and some supervision from us, and then provided that to the girls she was working with, and reported significant improvements in their PTSD symptoms in a period of 2 to 4 weeks. And here you see her, she's teaching them coherent breathing. They found it very beneficial. So again, it doesn't matter how severe or extreme the trauma. These are Rohingya refugee children. We got a phone call from a small nonprofit. If you remember, in Myanmar, the government has been conducting a genocide against the Rohingya minority, and finally just drove them out of the country over a river, and they landed in Bangladesh, about 1 million of them, now in sprawling, muddy, impoverished refugee camps, basically. And about 300,000 of these are traumatized children, about half of them orphans. They've seen their parents slaughtered. They themselves have been attacked in a variety of ways. And so they called me to say, we're going to be getting our first group of children, and we want some help. What can you tell our teachers that they could do to help them recover from these traumas? So I said, when are the kids coming? They said 3 weeks. So we did, over the 3 weeks, by Zoom, I taught their teachers a number of practices, and they began immediately to use them. And you can see here a group of the children. They're doing a practice we call energy ball, and we use it to teach them coherent breathing and pace their breath with the energy ball. The organization told us it was very helpful for the children in terms of helping them come out of their withdrawal, helping them to cope with their angry, impulsive reactions. And they then began bringing this and teaching this to the people who were caring for them in the camps, the NGO workers who knew very little and had no training in child trauma. And as they educated them and taught them practices and taught the kids, they then assessed the effect of that. And what happened was the NGO staff said, you know, we realize we really haven't been as nice to these children as we could be, and we really need to understand what their symptoms are and their behaviors. And the children said they noticed that the workers were much nicer, would ask them what they wanted to do, and so on and so forth. So it had multiple benefits for the children and for their parents. Autonomic balance is key for emotion regulation, social emotional learning, connectedness, bonding, mental focus, awareness, and stress resiliency. Just some resources. This is the book we've written about, The Healing Power of the Breath. It actually teaches a number of the breathing practices, and it has audio tracks with it. We also have one on non-drug treatments for ADD, if you notice that. These are a number of online free access mental health support websites where we have provided lectures and videos. NoLimitGeneration.org is the organization that works with the Rohingya refugee children, and they now have a free online, it's a whole series of teaching videos for people, and it demonstrates our techniques for working with children. So any of you who have children or who work with the children, this is great, whether you're a parent, a school teacher, or a mental health professional, or a pediatric physician, so on. And then this is our own website, Breath, Body, Mind with the hyphens, where you can get more information and a free newsletter and videos of our work. These are some of the nonprofits we've worked with. And the reading list has a number of references that you might be interested in. So I just want to leave you with our final message, which is autonomic balance is the key, and breathing is our portal to autonomic balance. So we're going to ask that you hold your questions until the end, and Dr. Brown is now going to teach you some of the practices.
So the first part, I'll ask you to stand up, and then we'll do some movement with breathing, and then we'll go into focusing on the coherent breathing. When we do the sitting or lying down breathing, you'll want to make yourself comfortable. When we do that part, I suggest you lie down. If you can. If you can't, you can certainly do it sitting. You can learn to do it standing on your head at the edge of the Grand Canyon if you wish. But in the beginning, it's nice to do it lying down. And then we'll do a quick body scan, because I know many of you don't have much time for doing anything like this. But you will get much more back in terms of feeling better and performing better and relating better to yourself, to other people, and the environment. So the first thing we'll do to just get a layer of stress off, and we've been sitting around so much, especially during the pandemic, let's just start by shaking. One anthropologist calls this the shaman's bounce. It's found all over the world at the start of any healing ritual or self-healing or cohesive ritual. Just shaking very gently, just using your upper legs to move your body up and down, your arms dangling like ropes, and your head's kind of bobbing a little bit. Shaking very relaxed. There are different ways to enhance the stress release from this, but we use a simple way for a second. Imagine a waterfall of beautiful light flowing down from the sky through the top of your head, down through your body, down through your legs, out through the soles of your feet into the earth. Beautiful waterfall of light. As you just keep shaking. You could be going up on the ball of your foot or on a flat foot, whichever feels better for you right now. Keep the waterfall of light flowing. And then come to stillness, your spine extending toward the sun, shoulders and hips dropping toward the earth. Closing your eyes, or partway closing, whichever is more comfortable for you. Go inside, observe the sensations in your body and the kinds of thoughts you're having and the qualities of your breathing. Now, opening our eyes, I'm going to pace your breathing with movement. It makes it much easier learning it at first. So my hands are now palms up just below my navel. Just follow my movement and breath count, like you're just imitating whatever simple thing I do. Breathing in, hands coming up, 2, 3, 4, and breathing out. Touch the horizons, 3, 4. Breath in, coming up, 2, 3, 4. Breath out, 2, 3, 4. Breath in, 2, 3, 4. Breath out, 2, 3, 4. Breath in, coming up, 3, 4, breath out, 2, 3, 4. Stay with me, not too fast, not too slow. Breath in, 3, 4, breath out, 2, 3, 4. Again, breath in, coming up, 2, 3, 4, breath out, 2, 3, 4. Again, breath in, 2, 3, 4, breath out, 2, 3, 4. Last time, breath in, 2, 3, 4, breath out, 2, 3, 4. Relax. Once again, go inside, closing your eyes if possible. Observe the sensations in your body. Observe the quality of your thoughts and attention. Can you feel the rhythm of your breath without changing it? And opening our eyes, I'm going to sit down. If you can, I'll ask you to lie down. To protect your back, you may need to put something like pillows or a blanket folded up under your knees to keep your back in neutral posture. And again, I'm going to guide you in the breathing. Now understand, because we're addicted to stress, this breathing, which makes everything work optimally and for a long time after you do a round, it's very different from how you ordinarily breathe. And even people who've done many other kinds of breathing don't find it comfortable at first either, because they've often been taught to slow way down their breath. But although that's valuable, this breathing gives you the optimal balance of energy and relaxation and attention to be in a meditative state during your daily activities, even under stress, as well as delivering more oxygen with every breath. Okay, so I've paced you with my voice and the movement in the breathing first to get you a little bit used to it. We're now going to use the sound of 2 bells chiming. If possible, I'll ask you to breathe in and out through the nose. You'll hear a high tone bell and a low tone bell. We'll be breathing in together on the high tone and out on the low tone. And I'll give you other directions as we go along. After a few minutes, I'll also ask you to use your imagination to move the breath inside your body. That takes your imagination. And I'll tell you more about that when we do it. Okay, so there's the low tone. We'll be breathing out with the low tones. And the high tone breathing in effortlessly, continuously. Breath out, your belly gets smaller. If possible, close your eyes. Breath in, your belly gets bigger. Breath out, the belly gets smaller. Breath in. Breath out, relax your face, your eyebrows, your jaw. Breath in. Breath out, relax your arms, your hands between your shoulder blades. Breath in. Breath out, relax your chest, your stomach, your lower back. Breath in. Breath out, relax your legs and feet and toes. Breath in, the belly gets bigger. Breath out, the belly gets smaller. If your stomach is going the other way, begin to sync it with what I'm saying. Breath in, belly bigger. Breath out, belly smaller. Effortless, continuous breath. If you fill up or empty out before the next chime, just pause your breath for a second or two. It's just some accumulated stress getting in the way. Breath in and breath out. Breath in, breath out. Breath in, breath out. Letting go more and more with each breath out. When your mind wanders, come back to feeling the breath moving in your nose and throat and letting the bells guide you. The high tone helps guide the breath into your body, and the low tone helps guide the breath from your body. Breath in and breath out. Whatever thought or memory or sensation that comes into awareness, just know it's part of a stress release. And bring your awareness back to feeling the breath moving inside you and staying close to the chimes. You don't have to be perfect. Breath out. Breath in. Now, as you continue to breathe in on the high tone and out on the low tone, let's begin to move the breath in the circuit found everywhere, first in the world, where sophisticated breathing is done. As you breathe out, base of the spine, breath in now, imagine the breath flowing up inside you to the top of the head. And as you breathe out, back down to the base of the spine. Can you imagine like a wave of water or a beautiful cooling breeze flowing up and down inside you? Breath in, base of the spine to the top of the head. Breath out, top of the head to the base of the spine. For calming breathing in and out through the nose. Breath out, base of the spine. Breath in, top of the head. You could just put all your attention on the base of the spine as you breathe out, and the top of your head as you breathe in. And after a bit, you begin to feel a sensation of energy moving. Or imagine you're on your favorite beach, right at the place where the waves lap gently at the sides of your body without coming over you. And imagine the wave is now washing up inside you on this high tone. And as you breathe out, back down inside you, back into the ocean. Breath in, flowing up to the top of the head. Breath out to the base of the spine. If you know ocean breath, as it's often called in yoga in America, or Ujjayi breathing in Sanskrit, you may use it with this rhythm of breathing. Breath in, top of the head. Breath out, base of the spine. And let go of moving the breath, breathing in on the high tone and out on the low tone. Just let your mind go where it wants to go. Perhaps it feels like you're riding waves of breath through space. Perhaps it feels like you've become the breath. Perhaps it feels like you're being breathed. And gently we're going to fade the chimes out. And just allow your breathing to go into whatever rhythm it wants to be in. And let's use our imaginations, which are subtle and effortless. Can you imagine being so still you can feel pulsations in your body in places you ordinarily do not? And let's become aware of our physical bodies, which are a beautiful gift to you, given by nature in love. Take your attention vividly to your feet, the space they occupy and the space around them. Can you feel the space behind your knees where your legs bend? Can you feel the volume of both legs from your toes to your hips, like they are filled with space, yet surrounded by space? Can you feel the space between your navel to your backbone and down to the sit bones and pelvic bones? This is your reservoir of physical vitality. Is it possible to feel the volume of your lungs as they expand and contract gently? Can you imagine your arms from your fingertips to your shoulders filled with space like balloons filled with helium? And yet feeling the spaces between your fingers, between your hands and arms and around them. Feeling the space inside your windpipe as your breath moves gently through it. Feeling the space inside your nostrils. The space inside your mouth. The space deep inside your ears. Is it possible to feel the breath coming from your nose up and around your eyeballs, caressing them and feeling them let go and soften? Can you imagine as the breath comes into your body, every cell is filled with energy, which it is, and as the breath leaves your body, you're left filled with empty space, like a flute, filled with empty space as the breath leaves your body. And as you feel the space your whole body occupies, can you feel the space the room occupies around you? That is, feeling the space from your body to the ceiling and the walls and the floor of the room. Can you feel more of a space between your thoughts than when we started? Become aware of the sensations in your body. Become aware of your feelings, whether positive or negative, whether pleasant or unpleasant. Become aware of the sounds around you, close to you, and far away. And then you can stretch your arms and legs like a cat awakening from a nap. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. You can gently bring yourself up to sitting, or not. You may wish to continue to relax. Okay, so I know you're getting some chat answers. Perhaps we can move to more questions now with the whole panel.
Amazing. I'm so relaxed I can't think, let alone be afraid of anything. Thank you so much, both for a very informative lecture and the practice. I hope our participants were able to sample some of the techniques and benefits of breathing. While you were talking and demonstrating techniques, we got quite a few questions. First of all, we'll place the slides and this recording on our website, and it is www.semel.ucla.edu Integrative Mental Health. It's in the chat, the website. Second of all, some of the participants said that they could stay for the whole duration and they were interested in experiencing it. Second of all, a lot of questions asked, how long do you have to breathe to achieve benefits?
Mhm.
And can you comment on the nature of these practices, where they're coming from, and a lot of questions on the background information on cortisol level, autonomic system, and so forth.
Okay, well, we could spend hours on those things, but
Yes.
the dose, interestingly, well, let's say this kind of coherent breathing was described 3,000 years ago in a Chinese Buddhist medical text as the breathing for longevity. And they understood the two major branches of the autonomic nervous system at that time. But it was discovered and rediscovered by different people, kept secret in different religious traditions, but also used in martial arts. And I first encountered it with Qigong as well as Aikido from a Japanese Aikido master. And Aikido uses healing practices going back thousands of years in Asia. But modern researchers, Paul Lehrer from New Jersey, a psychologist, went with Japanese researchers to study Zen monks at 3 famous traditional monasteries around Tokyo. And they looked at many things that happened as they were meditating. And they didn't understand it, but they found that the monks who were rated as advanced by the abbots, who'd all been meditating 8 hours a day for 20 or more years, as soon as they began meditation, they immediately began doing this breathing. They had never been taught it. It took years of meditating for their bodies to discover it as facilitating everything. They then went back to their lab and began experiments in which they had normal people breathe in all possible rhythms. Mm-hmm. Around the same time, Dr. Bernardi, Luciano Bernardi in Milan, a cardiologist who studies breathing in CHF and COPD and high altitude adaptation, was beginning the same experiments. And both laboratories around the same time independently realized and they weren't looking at this, they had people breathe in all possible rhythms. When they breathed in this way, every system they could measure in the brain and the body became optimal. And what happens between about minute 5 to 8, if you're following the directions and relaxing your body, everyone is achieving a total cortex synchronous coherent alpha wave. And research has gone on from there, but again, that's it's a lot of time. But I was taught it in martial arts. So the idea is in Aikido, when you achieve black belt traditionally, you practice being attacked by 4 or 5 people at a time. And they do mean to bring you down and or hurt you. And if you're not practicing breathing, you will generally get injured in that process and not be able to accomplish it. Your brain is able to function much better, and yet you're still in meditation if you practice regularly. It looks like from Lehrer's work that 20 minutes of a round, and that's probably what the monks traditionally did, practicing, that gets really profound effects, and your body's electrical potential is raised considerably.
Okay. One of the questions asked, in your studies, did you include lower socioeconomic status participants, any people of color, and this kind of thing?
Right. So just the study Pat described in Mississippi, half the participants were of color and often extremely low income. I mean, they'd had 2 hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, and then the BP oil spill. And one of our days, we actually spent working with a huge group of homeless.
Okay.
Not just that.
You know, also in New York, I mean, everyone, and the nonprofit, you know, provided a sliding scale and free access. And we did pro bono workshops. So many of the people who came were from lower strata. And and many of our teachers and reached out and went and got some of the ground zero workers our teachers work with, who not only had no benefits to help them recover, but many were undocumented and therefore were afraid to ask for help. So yeah, we have teachers of all colors, and we have served populations from many cultures. One of the ways that we work, because a question was asked, how do we do this and not come in as, quote, the white saviors? You know, we do our best to show respect for the people and their culture. So for example, when the teachers work in Rohingya, and I did a lot of videos for them into the language of the people. I told them, we use a lot of music in our program. I said, use the music of the people, use their songs, show respect for their language. So even though obviously we're not of their culture, we do our best to show respect for their culture. And I think that's very much appreciated.
Okay, so have you found patients not able or resistant to practicing for a long time or routinely?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest obstacles, is that it's hard for people to maintain a discipline, even if they only have to do 20 minutes a day. And so it depends on several things. It depends on their culture. Some people are much more oriented to doing what you tell them to do if you're the doctor, and other people are not. So in private therapy, just like you have to check on, is someone taking their medication? You know, I ask them, you know, how many times this week did you manage to do your practices? And if they didn't do them at all regularly, I say, what are the obstacles? So then you have to help the person identify and eliminate the obstacles to regular practice. But this is a challenge. We also find that if you can offer like a regular once a week or once a month group, that will reinforce and help people stay with their practices. So yeah, it's absolutely a challenge.
I find that typically what happens is the doctor who does the practice regularly has a different presence with people, and most clients, and we found this in Africa, sometimes when we first came in, people would say, you're just a neo-colonializer. Oh. And, you know, we'd say, that's okay, you don't have to do this, but the people who want to do it will do it. And then they began to feel what was happening in the room. And at the end, they'd come up to us and say, thank you so much, I'm sorry I said that to you, I hope you're not angry at me. And I've had patients, they would resist doing this for 3, 4, 5 years, often because they had been sexually abused by a healthcare provider.
Oh my.
Eventually do it and be very grateful. They had to do it in their own time. Or one of our best teachers, a child psychiatrist, she not only learned it from us, her 2 children learned it. And she was like many doctors, after about 3 or 4 weeks, she stopped doing it. She was so busy and she didn't think it was doing anything. And about 5 days later, the 2 kids came to her. They were like 4 and 6. And they said, Mommy, can you do your breathing again? You were so much nicer when you were doing your breathing. And she was like, oh my God, they know when I'm not doing my breathing? And they did, every day.
Yes, that's very true. Dr. Sarah Nguyen and myself have opened a new clinic in integrative psychiatry, and we find that it's very difficult to make people do things that help themselves. Right. You know, once they have to do something, they're not motivated, and they drop off and they don't necessarily follow. Do you deal with this somehow?
One thing that I find really helps is it takes me about 20 minutes in a session to get someone to be doing the breathing well. But the great thing about it is that within about 5 minutes, that individual will experience a deeper level of relaxation than they can remember having. So because it works quickly, if you can't just tell them to do it. You have to do it with them, have them experience that and say, oh my God, this, you know, and have them notice the changes. And then you say, you can do this for yourself. Would you like to try? And then you support that practice as you go along.
And we didn't show you studies from a clinic in Toronto that specializes in the most treatment-resistant patients with psychiatric symptoms. And they've usually been to 10 providers, and everybody's charts are, huge. When they started doing this, and they're very good at mindfulness, CBT, and every kind of psychotherapy and medication combinations, and they found this had a profound impact on their patients, better than anything. And they started offering group sessions for people who had done the course. They started bringing their family members, and they had to get progressively bigger and bigger spaces, but doing it together with people they'd done the breathing with in their course, who became friends, and family members really reinforced doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I think also involving children is very important because the kids learn it really quickly and they like it. They like to be able to calm themselves down. They like to be able to put themselves to sleep at night. And they like to be the teachers. They like to teach their siblings. They like to teach their parents. And so sometimes that will engage the parents. Or you can engage the parents because they will do something for their children's benefit, even if they won't do it for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. People feel cold afterwards. This is the cooling exercise. Breath is a cooling. So when you feel enraged, hot, and you want to strike out somebody who's near you, you take a cooling deep breath and you calm down. There was a question about using breathing for the recent events type of thing, when racism is experienced. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, one thing is the breathing, because it brings your autonomic system to balance, your body will begin to do self-correcting processes. So if you need blood to go from your muscles and skin to your core organs, you'll start feeling cool. But sometimes if the blood hasn't been going to your skin and muscles, it will go there and you'll start feeling warm. And in some courses, people accuse me of manipulating the thermostat by making it hotter or cooler, and I don't do a thing. So this helps your body find where it needs to be, which may differ day to day, week to week, month to month. But this breathing is extremely helpful for anger, as well as cravings.
So there's a question about how tall you are. Do you have to modify the number of breaths or pace or anything else?
No. Go ahead. So what has been studied is that if you're 6 feet or more in height, the breathing needs to slow down, especially if you do cardio. So a doctor I've taught who's about 6'4", and most of the military people we train are well above 6 feet. To carry a 120-pound pack and jump out of helicopters all day, you better be big. And they should slow the breath down to 3.5 breaths per minute. But when they start out, when they've been anxious and stressed, it's good to start at 5 breaths per minute and then slow the breath down. So there are many breathing apps to do that. For children, depending on the age, the breathing needs to change and may need to be faster. So we don't have time to get into all that today, but that's part of teacher training.
Yeah, children have so much more flexibility. Even a 9-year-old child generally can breathe at 5 breaths per minute comfortably. It's amazing. But, they can breathe a little faster too. So it's very cool.
Do you have any recommendations for releasing face tension due to stress?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a bunch of things we do in a longer course because a lot of tension goes to our face. And, you could, let's say the simplest thing is, some of you, if you've done yoga, you know something called lion. So you're like, and there are different modifications of that. So one of our friends who's a teacher in London did ads for Revlon teaching them yoga exercises to maintain your facial suppleness and relaxation. And a lot of it involved going, and going, and also the other thing is, one thing we sometimes do for fun and relaxation in a course is, for example, I'm going to make a face at you and you imitate the face back to me.
Okay.
Let me say this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Don't have to do that kind of stuff to relax your face, okay? First of all, and I've had cases of extreme, for example, TMJ pain from a locked jaw. Just doing the breathing 20 minutes a day, every day, over a period of time, just that can take care of it. We also have practices where we combine the breathing with relaxing muscles and areas of tension in the body. We go through any area. So, for example, if you have an injury or a particular pain or something in a shoulder, we have practices where you learn to use your imagination to move your breath through the area of tension or pain. And those are wonderful. So we have many more advanced and elaborate things than we could show you. We just want to give you the basics. And at the next lecture that we give on the 17th, Dr. Brown is going to show you 2 more practices. We did relaxing, calming things today. He's going to show you 2 energizing, activating practices when we come back on the 17th. But there are many, many more and many different ways to apply them.
Do you always have to start with shaking or then lying down? Is there?
No, there are many ways to segue into this, but for some people where they have a lot of stress, whether it's anger or fear or whatever, shaking is a very quick way of just enabling them to even sit down to do the breathing.
And there was a question about nose breathing versus mouth breathing or combination.
So we recommend nose breathing unless the person has a really bad obstruction, because studies have shown that when you breathe through the nose, you activate additional areas of the brain. So you're getting, in a sense, more bang for your buck.
It's more calming. And I teach martial arts, and sometimes we use breathing through the mouth to be activating, okay? But today, we want to teach people how to really chill themselves out in a short time.
Sarah, I think you might have a question.
No, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you wanted to participate in next week's webinar, you would have to register again, and it is free, and it was on the first flyer that you were sent by email. And I did type it out in the chat box as well for the registration link.
Any remaining words of wisdom and recommendations for our audience?
We haven't been able to get to, but our book, The Healing Power of the Breath, that has audio tracks with it, we've had many emails. I'd say for some years after it came out, we had more emails from women in South Africa in the townships saying that doing the breathing exercises on that CD had healed their sexual PTSD, and they were extremely grateful. And we haven't talked about work in Rwanda with a women's empowerment nonprofit, or the work in South Sudan is much more extensive than we're talking about. So, you know, what we found is this is comfortable in every culture all over the world, as long as we don't use religious words. And the things we're doing here are found in Qigong and yoga. And the closest way developed first for how I teach was developed by Russian Orthodox monks, we think about 1,000 years ago. All religious practices, I think, were doing these things in some way, but they typically did not share them. They discovered them independently.
I'd like to just quickly pick up on some of these other questions I'm seeing before we go. Someone is asking about whether there's been work on the impact of paced breathing on cardiac arrhythmias. And I would love to see a study, because we've certainly had a number of patients who have AFib, atrial fib, for example. And when they do slow paced breathing, it often stops the AFib and returns them to a normal rhythm. So if there's a cardiologist out there, I think this would be a very helpful thing. One of our friends had it, and he called the ambulance, and by the time they came, he was in normal rhythm again. So I think that is very helpful. There's also a question about clarifying the practice. We're talking about once a day for 20 minutes a day, 20 continuous minutes seems to be the therapeutic dose. Now, for people who have severe anxiety disorders or PTSD, sometimes we recommend they do 20 minutes twice a day initially until their symptoms are better. And also, after a while, we teach people how to do it with their eyes open so that throughout the day, whenever they start to feel tense or anxious, they can simply go into the slow breathing. They could be at work or anywhere, and it's totally private. That's the beauty. Nobody knows you're doing it, and yet you are calming your system down. So it can be done throughout the day in little bits whenever needed, and at bedtime. And in the book, we talk about how to use it for sleep. There are lots of little modifications you can do that make it work for different situations. Somebody's asking about...
Someone was asking, how do you teach breath moving if someone resists it? Well, some of our best teachers just teach breathing with the 2 bells and do great work, including in Africa. What I'd say is if someone resists or doesn't like some part of this, I just tell them, just breathe with the bells. And often what happens after a couple of weeks, it's easy to say to them, if you move the breath, it achieves a deeper level of stress release. And if you're comfortable in doing that now, I'll help you with it. And if that's not your cup of tea, don't worry about it for now. So, and there are all kinds of ways to modify these things. And we get into that in teacher training. So like when we do the military, there's about 5%, say in a brigade of 350 people or 400 people, they refuse to do it. And we just say, or teenagers in high school, and we just say, it's okay, you don't have to do it, but don't disturb other people who are benefiting from it. And what typically happens after they do it for a while, they're feeling the change in the emotional state of the room. And they start doing it, but pretending like they're kind of like not doing it, but they do it, and it evolves.
Okay, and Pat, as a final goodbye, can you tell a story of your pendant, of your heart pendant?
I like to wear this. The women in South Sudan whom you saw, former slaves, were taught how to sew these Swarovski glass beads to make hearts. And these are sold by a charitable organization called Goats for the Old Goat to raise money for goats so that these women can feed their families. And so this was one of the hearts made by the hands of the former slaves, which is what imbues it with some special quality. So thank you for asking about it.
Thank you so much for this informative and helpful lecture and demonstration. And we're looking forward to our next webinar.
Great.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Helen.
you.
We enjoyed it. Bye-bye.